New York City, a jewel box of concrete and ambition. But beneath the polished chrome and the glittering marquees of Broadway, a darkness was taking root, thriving in the opulent shadows of Fifth Avenue. This is the story they tried to bury, a file marked with a code the NYPD never officially acknowledged: demon living on Fifth Avenue. It wasn't a human killer, it wasn't a gang war, it was something primal, ancient, and utterly parasitic, a force that chose the gilded cage of a millionaire's mansion as its hunting ground. The official report said gas leak. The truth was scrawled on the victim's wall in a language that predated Babel. Tonight we open the vault on a case that broke the spirit of a seasoned detective and revealed that sometimes the most monstrous creatures don't need sharp teeth, they just need an open door to a wealthy soul. In a city defined by its heroes and villains, one man navigated the terrifying space between them. His name was Cain Bones, a private investigator with a reputation built not on finding missing persons or exposing infidelity, but on confronting things that defy the laws of physics and sanity. Cain was a relic of a dying breed, a man who saw the occult as simply another type of crime, one requiring a different kind of police work. He carried the weight of every lost soul he'd ever saved or failed to save, etched into the lines around his weary eyes. The year was 1941, and war anxiety permeated the city air, but for Cain, the greatest dangers were those unseen. The call came through a compromised police channel, a whisper from Lieutenant Alastair Thorne, an old cynical copper in the Midtown precinct. Thorne, a man of 52, who trusted only cold facts and hard liquor, had seen something on Fifth Avenue that shredded his reality. A prominent mansion, home to the elderly millionaire Percival Croft, was sealed off, its facade silent and imposing, yet radiating an unspeakable dread. The official report was sanitized. His coded message to Cain was raw fear. The thing is still breathing, Bones. It ate the soul of a man, and we can't even charge it with murder. Cain knew this wasn't a case of human depravity. It was something hungry, something that had found a perfect, luxurious den right in the heart of Manhattan. This was where the devil kept his penthouse. If you dare to delve into the shadows with Detective Bones, smash that like button and subscribe to unlock more secret files. Tell me, in the comments below, what city and country are you watching this story from? I would love to know how far these untold histories are traveling. The rain was a persistent, unforgiving curtain, washing the grime from the elegant stonework of Fifth Avenue. It was the kind of night that made the shadows stretch and dance, perfectly matching the unease radiating from the Croft Mansion, number 812. Lieutenant Alastair Thorne, a man whose 62 years on the force had rendered him mostly immune to shock, stood by the wrought iron gate, his trench coat collar pulled high. He looked like a man trying to outrun his own skeleton. Thorne had called Cain Bones not out of belief, but out of absolute, terrified desperation. The official report cited a tragic boiler malfunction that had asphyxiated the mansion's owner, Percival Croft. But Thorne's secret radio transmission, the one using the illicit demon living code, told the truth. Percival Croft hadn't died. He had been emptied. "Bones," Thorne rasped, his voice tight. "If this is a prank, I swear I'll have your license revoked for good." Cain, his expression impassive, surveyed the mansion. "You didn't call me about a gas leak, Lieutenant. What did you find that broke you?" Thorne hesitated, glancing nervously at the upper windows. The body! It was a husk, like a dried fruit. But the worst part, the thing they tried to scrub off the wallpaper in the master bedroom, it was a glyph. Not ink, Bones, not paint. The lab boys couldn't identify it. It was organic, and it felt like it was still looking at us.
Thorne produced a small silver key, his hand trembling slightly. The medical examiner dated the death 3 days ago, but the police found a coded ledger, and the last entry, dated yesterday, simply read, "It has finished the meal. I am the waiter." The house is locked down. Nobody goes in but you. If you can't make sense of it, then nothing can. Kane took the key, the cold metal a stark contrast to the boiling heat of the unspeakable mystery that lay ahead. He was entering a scene that the law could not touch, a crime that existed only in the realm of the damned. The very air around the property felt heavy, saturated with a silence that screamed louder than any witness. The detective nodded once, a gesture of grim acceptance, and turned toward the massive oak door, leaving the shivering lieutenant in the relentless downpour. The silence of the mansion was a predator's breath, and Kane Bones had just stepped into its territory. The code, demon living on Fifth Avenue, was not a warning. It was a label, freshly applied to a new resident.
The interior of the Croft mansion was a preserved monument to Gilded Age excess, now overlaid with a chilling, preternatural decay. The air was unnaturally cold, a biting chill that seemed to emanate not from the outside temperature, but from the very structure of the building. Kane Bones moved with the focused concentration of a surgeon, his eyes missing nothing. The Persian rugs were undisturbed, the antique furniture pristine, yet everywhere there were subtle, sickening details that defied rational explanation. On the landing of the grand staircase, the mahogany banister was scored with deep, claw-like gouges, too regular to be accidental, too deep to be human. The body of Percival Croft had been removed, but the impression of his final moments lingered in the master bedroom. A faint, cloying scent, like burnt honey and ozone, clung to the heavy drapes. The massive 4-poster bed was crumpled, not by a struggle, but by a sudden, violent implosion of weight. Kane ran his gloved hand over the wall where Thorne had mentioned the glyph. The police had indeed tried to remove it. The wallpaper was bleached and scarred, but the subtle outline of the symbol persisted, a spiraling, fractal pattern that seemed to absorb the light. It was a signature, Kane realized, not a message, the sign of an entity that communicated not through language, but through sheer, terrifying presence. He checked the windows, sealed from the inside. He checked the doors, double-locked. Whatever had consumed Percival Croft had been an invited guest or an object already present within the mansion walls. In the hallway, a collection of priceless ceramics was scattered across a table, but not broken. They were merely moved, as if by a sudden, localized gust of wind from within the room itself. Kane picked up a small porcelain statue. It was cold to the touch, and beneath the glaze, Kane could swear he saw the faint impression of tiny pinprick blisters, marks of extreme, localized heat and pressure. The mansion was not just a container for the entity, it was becoming a part of it, an organic extension of its horrifying needs. He had seen this before. The entity thrives on isolation and a specific type of human energy, pure, unrestrained ambition. Percival Croft, a man who had built a fortune with ruthless, singular focus, had unwittingly laid the perfect trap for himself. The investigation was not about finding a killer, it was about defining the boundaries of a cage.
Kane knew he needed to understand the victim's final days, to see who the man on Fifth Avenue had become before he ceased to be a man entirely. The next step was talking to someone who knew Percival Croft before the silence fell.
The thread leading back to Percival Croft's life before his consumption was a woman whose grief was as tailored and expensive as her silk dress. Mrs. Elara Vance, Percival's 58-year-old sister, met Kane in the sterile, unfeeling environment of a private club lounge. She was a woman of rigid societal grace, yet a deep, rattling fear lived behind her perfectly manicured facade. She was the one who had initiated the welfare check, the only family member who dared approach the terrifying silence of the Fifth Avenue house. Percival was not himself for months, Elara stated, her voice barely a tremor above a whisper, clutching a delicate teacup. He became obsessed, not with money, not with women, but with acquisition. He was gathering things, books, artifacts, mirrors. He said he was preparing a sanctuary. Kane leaned forward, his focus absolute. Did he ever mention feeling watched or hearing things? Elara swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously toward the lounge's heavy curtains. He began to talk about a presence, a partner, he called it. Someone who could see the real world behind the veil. He grew thin, refused to eat. He spent every hour locked in his private study on the 3rd floor. He even soundproofed the room, said he needed to keep the noise out and the secrets in. Kane inquired about the study. Elara confirmed it, a room that Percival had created himself behind a false bookcase, an architectural secret known only to the two of them. It was a space designed for total seclusion, a laboratory for his rapidly deteriorating mental state. He stopped sleeping, Elara continued, her composure finally cracking. He would spend his nights writing in a vast, leather-bound book he'd acquired. He said the book wasn't about something, but that it was something. He was convinced he was evolving, transcending. Then, 3 weeks ago, he called me, not his butler, me. He said, "Elara, I've made a terrible mistake. The waiter is here to collect the bill." Then the line went dead. I didn't see him again until the police called. The image of the body, the husk, flashed in Kane's mind. The waiter was indeed here, and the bill was a human soul. Elara's testimony confirmed Kane's gravest suspicion. Percival Croft hadn't been possessed. He had been in a horrifying codependent relationship with something ancient, selling himself for an unknown, terrifying reward. And the isolated study was the scene of the transaction. The soundproofing was not to keep the world out, but to muffle the sounds of his final, inevitable undoing.
Armed with Elara Vance's information, Kane Bones returned to the mansion, bypassing the main floor of lingering dread and ascending to the 3rd floor. He found the false bookcase tucked away in a dimly lit, rarely used corridor. After a moment's tactile investigation, he located the almost invisible release mechanism. The bookcase swung inward with a heavy, scraping sound, revealing a narrow, unlit doorway. A wave of oppressive, stale air, heavy with the scent of old paper and something metallic, rushed out.
This was the sanctum, the altar where Percival Croft had traded his life for a terrifying partnership. The study was small, completely devoid of windows, and lined with thick acoustic paneling, a tomb within a mansion. In the center, beneath a single weak electric lamp, sat a massive, bolted-down writing desk. The room contained only 3 things: the desk, a small military-style cot, and a single immense book lying open on the desk's surface. The book was bound in what appeared to be human leather, its pages filled with a dense, chaotic script that pulsed with an internal, sickening brown luminescence under the light. It wasn't merely a book. It was a physical manifestation of a corrupt, parasitic intelligence. Kane approached the desk with caution, his senses on high alert. The atmosphere here was thick, making it difficult to breathe, as if the air itself was resisting his presence. He noted the residue that Ilara had described. It was caked onto the corners of the desk and the edges of the book, a dark, crystalline substance that seemed to have organic fibers woven into it. Kane recognized the telltale sign of a dimensional bleed. The entity hadn't simply inhabited the room. It had left a part of its true, horrific environment behind. The book was the key, the conduit, and the bait. Percival Croft hadn't been writing in it. He had been transcribing the entity's will, recording the final acts of his own spiritual suicide. He had created a perfect echo chamber for the creature's influence. Kane did not dare to touch the book directly. He used a piece of sterile cloth to gently turn a page. The script shimmered, and a faint, high-pitched hum filled the soundproof room. This was not a demon that demanded worship or sacrifice. This was an intelligence that demanded life force and memory, consuming the essence of its host to sustain its manifestation in the physical world. The opulence of Fifth Avenue was just the backdrop for a more sinister, metaphysical form of high finance. Kane knew that the entity was dormant, having exhausted its host, but it was still connected to this chamber. He needed to understand its ancient history to find a way to sever the connection, or risk becoming the entity's next unsuspecting host.
The next 24 hours were spent not in the mansion, but in the musty, dust-choked archives beneath the New York Public Library, a different kind of silent tomb. Kane Bones, aided by his own specialized library of forbidden texts, began to cross-reference the glyph, the residue, and the specific architecture of Percival Croft's obsession. The immense leather-bound book from the study was deemed too dangerous to move, so Kane worked from photographs and rubbings. The answer lay in a nearly forgotten tract concerning pre-Babylonian metaphysics and parasitic entities. The text spoke of an entity known as the Mora, an ancient psychic siphon. The Mora was not a creature of fire and brimstone, but one of ambition and avarice, a silent predator that attached itself to hosts driven by exceptional singular focus. In the modern world, it was drawn to the overwhelming energies of capital and ego, making the upper echelons of 1940s New York City the perfect hunting ground. The Mora didn't kill its host instantly. It entered into a mutually destructive symbiosis. It granted the host insight, a terrifying clarity on how to achieve their wildest ambitions, while simultaneously draining their emotional and spiritual resilience. Percival Croft, a man obsessed with being the wealthiest and most influential on Fifth Avenue, had unknowingly opened the door by desiring something more than human power. The entity was drawn to the soundproof room, the place of highest concentration of his ambition and focus, and used the corrupted book as an anchor, a physical manifestation of their contract. The final stage of the Mora's process was what Kane had witnessed in the mansion. The host, upon achieving a terrifying apex of clarity, realizes the emptiness of their success, just as the entity prepares to sever the connection, consuming the remnants of the host's memory and soul for nourishment. This process caused the rapid desiccation of the body and the physical manifestation of the residual glyphs. The metallic scent and the organic residue were the physical trace of the Mora retreating, sated, but dormant, leaving its anchor behind. The problem was that the Mora was not gone. It was merely waiting for a new host to stumble into its prepared chamber. The police code, "demon living on Fifth Avenue," was frighteningly accurate, as the entity was still occupying the house, utilizing the massive energy field of the city's ambition to remain anchored to its feeding ground. Kane realized the goal wasn't to fight a demon, but to destroy an elaborate, metaphysical feeding machine that Percival Croft had unknowingly constructed. The book was the engine, and the chamber was the power source.
To understand the climax of the tragedy, Kane Bones had to mentally inhabit Percival Croft's final, desperate days. Through fragmented journal entries found elsewhere in the mansion, scribbled on loose financial reports and cocktail napkins, a horrifying narrative of a final struggle emerged. The entries were dated in the 3 weeks between Ilara's last visit and the police discovery, documenting the accelerated decay of a soul. Entry: October 15th, 1941. The clarity is intoxicating. I see the flaws in the market before they occur. The Mora delivers. But the cost. I no longer taste food. I no longer remember my mother's face. I am becoming a perfect machine, and the machine is hungry. The entries chronicled his physical deterioration, his withdrawal from society, and the constant cold presence of the entity in the soundproof room. Percival realized too late that he hadn't gained a partner. He had invited a virus. The final, chilling entries showed a man attempting to trap his own parasite. Percival, utilizing the very insights the Mora had granted him, attempted a desperate, self-taught ritual. He began to paint protective symbols, the very symbols Thorne had seen, but corrupting them with his own desperate fear, hoping to turn the chamber into a prison for the Mora. This only served to strengthen the entity's anchor, turning the protective glyphs into permanent binding contracts for his own demise. Entry: October 20th, 1941. It is laughing now, not with sound, but with pure knowledge. It told me the truth. I built the cage, and I am the only one inside it. I tried to seal the book, but my hands obey it. I am the writer, but the story is its own. I will try to leave. I must leave. The final scrawled entry confirmed his fate. The waiter is here. Percival Croft hadn't died from a gas leak. He had died trying to run from a room he could no longer leave, consumed by an entity that had extracted every valuable memory, dream, and life force until nothing but the outer shell remained. Cane Bones understood that Percival's final, desperate act was to try and lock the chamber from the inside. The Mora, sated, simply waited for the inevitable arrival of the next curious intruder, a process Percival, in his final, terrifying clarity, may have foreseen and tried to warn against. Cane's job was no longer to mourn a victim, but to confront a patient, calculated, and terrifyingly sophisticated intelligence that was waiting for its next meal on one of the world's most luxurious streets.
Cane Bones returned to the soundproofed study on the 3rd floor, this time prepared. The Mora was not a traditional demonic entity that required holy water or incantations. It was an intelligence of pure spiritual avarice, anchored by the corrupted book and the energy of its recent meal. The only way to stop it was to deprive it of its anchor and its connection to the physical plane. Cane brought with him only 2 items: a powerful, antique silver mirror consecrated over a decade ago in a forgotten Romanian monastery, and a specially formulated heavy black wax, a substance mixed with iron filings and consecrated salt. The atmosphere in the study was noticeably colder than before. The silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure against the eardrums. The pulsing luminescence of the book was stronger now, a faint, sickly glow in the dim light. Cane could sense the Mora's attention, a cold, clinical curiosity directed at his presence. It was watching him. The parasitic intelligence was probing Cane's mind, looking for the seams of ambition, the secret desires that could be exploited. But Cane Bones was a wall of weary self-control, his own ambitions having been sacrificed long ago to the pursuit of the paranormal. The Mora found nothing but a vast, empty space where a healthy ego should have resided. The confrontation began not with fire or fury, but with silence. Cane placed the silver mirror directly in front of the open book, ensuring the horrifying, scrawled text was reflected perfectly. The Mora's anchor was the text. The mirror, with its silver barrier and ritual history, created a closed circuit, forcing the Mora's own reflection, its parasitic reality, back upon itself. As the light from the book hit the silver, the air in the room rippled. The temperature dropped instantly, causing a visible condensation of the air. A low, guttural vibration, not a sound, but a felt tremor, shook the soundproofed walls. The book's pages began to flutter violently, and the organic residue on the desk began to smoke. The entity was struggling, trapped by the reflection of its own non-existence.
The trembling intensified, and for a terrifying moment the single electric light flickered out, plunging the soundproof chamber into absolute blackness. Cane Bones worked purely by feel, relying on muscle memory and the intense psychic resistance radiating from the desk. The Mora, now enraged, began to manifest violently. Although Cane could not see it, he could feel its presence coalesce,
a shadow of cold, crushing weight that pressed down on his chest, whispering temptations and threats directly into his mind. You will be powerful, Bones. You will know everything. Just release the book. Ignoring the psychic assault, Kane took the pot of heavy black wax and, with rapid, deliberate movements, poured it directly onto the open pages of the leather-bound book. The contact between the consecrated wax and the Mora's anchor was instantaneous and violent. A shriek erupted, not audible, but a deafening internal sound that momentarily stunned Kane. The light, sickly brown luminescence of the script vanished completely, replaced by the dull black sheen of the wax. The organic residue on the desk crumbled into fine gray dust. The tremor stopped. The oppressive cold retreated, replaced by the normal, stale temperature of a long-closed room. The Mora's anchor was severed. Kane carefully wrapped the entire book, still fused shut by the wax, in several layers of lead foil, and placed it inside a specially prepared, lead-lined safe he had discreetly placed outside the study. He then used a ritual plaster to seal the entrance to the soundproof room permanently. When Lieutenant Thorne next saw Kane, the detective looked utterly exhausted. "It's done, Lieutenant," Kane said, his voice flat. "The gas leak story stands, but that room, it needs to be bricked up and forgotten. The thing that lived there is gone, but the place is infected." Thorne, pale but relieved, simply nodded. The official file on Percival Croft was closed, labeled "Accidental Death." The secret code was filed away, a nightmare the NYPD had no language to describe. Kane Bones left the mansion knowing that on the surface, Fifth Avenue remained a glittering monument to ambition. But beneath the facade, he knew a darkness had briefly held residency, and the only proof it had ever existed was the haunting, silent memory carried by the detective who had dared to serve the eviction notice.